Yeah.
So I've got a couple of thermoplastics with me today. They're the ones that are pretty well suited to millinery. There are others, but these are the ones that they're the only ones that I would use in millinery, really. And both of them are, well, one of them's this one, which is called Fosshape. It looks like a wadding type material. And it's probably different to all the other thermoplastics. And we'll see why, but what I'm going to do with it tonight is just block it over this shape, but you don't have to use a hat block with it. It's just probably one of the good features about it. But you do need some sort of a shape to mould it over, which is probably what makes it the most different to the others. So I'll just show you how to do that. So I've cut out a piece that's a little bit bigger than my block here, and you need to have it a little bit bigger because it does shrink when we heat it. If you look at their website, the people who make it, they'll tell you not to stretch it before you block it over something, but I do get it a little bit tight, just because it saves a little bit of fabric. And now this fabric comes in, like, you don't pull it really tight, just so it's over the shape. This fabric comes in 3 different thicknesses. The one I'm using here is Fosshape 300, which is the thinnest one. You probably wouldn't use this one for millinery that much because it's not quite sturdy enough for a foundation in millinery, depending on what you're going to block over the top of it. So probably you'd use the 600 or the 400. The 400 is the black one. The other two only come in white. The numbers just stand for the weight of it. So 300 is 300 grams per square metre. So it's pretty easy. The bigger the number, the heavier it is. So Fosshape 600 is double the thickness or weight of Fosshape 300. So I'm just sort of basically blocking this over my shape at the moment. And you don't have to block it perfectly, so just like that would be fine. And then what activates it, being a thermoplastic, is heat. So if I just heated this with a heat gun or something, then it would shrink and get harder. But for our purposes, I like to use an iron. And I do use steam, but steam's not necessary. It's just the heat that you need. And if you use too much steam, you can burn like a hole through it. So just be aware of that. It's not something that happens really easily, but if you really put some steam just in one spot, it can burn a hole through it. So what I do with it is I use the iron because I can also apply pressure as well as the heat. And my iron's turned off, so
Turn itself off?
it'll come back on in a sec. But what I want to do is use the iron to both push on it and heat it up evenly all over my blocked surface. It's heated up, so I'll just show you. Be careful of your hands, obviously, with the steam. show you what happens to just a piece that's not on a block in a minute, but so just sort of work around the edge of that, and you need to make sure you get all of the surface pressed down. And try not to burn your hand. So again, the steam's not necessary, it's just a good way of getting the heat into it really quickly. Okay, so you can't really see it, but if you feel this, it's got a bit harder. I'll pass it around, you can feel what it starts off like and what happens when you heat it.
So just while they're passing that around, Lindsay, Frida here's fashion, teaching the advanced diplomas fashion, and they would and perhaps use something like that as an underlay on a component in a garment.
Yeah.
And so you just need to find something that would be a shape that's in the direction that they want to make. And the beauty of them is you can, once it's been set, it won't reset, it won't re-soften.
Okay. So in theory, you could even model it around, like you could make a corset out of it, right? You could shape that around
You
a
definitely.
mannequin.
Yeah.
I've got a mannequin at work that's broken on the waist, and I
And you
put
fix it
Fosshape
with-
around it and
Wow.
like ironed it on
Yeah,
there. So
interesting.
And
you
Lindsay,
could certainly do that.
Lindsay's done costume, and one of the things that he has in his showroom is this amazing kind of Victorian with lots of flounces and stuff that look like there's a fair bit of there's certainly thermoplastic in there. Am I right? Am I wrong?
No, there's no thermoplastic.
Ah, I'm wrong.
It's all,
Not
all
for the
done
first time.
by
Next.
patterns, but yeah, there's no reason you couldn't make like corset pieces,
Or any kind of like,
etc.
could you grab, I don't know, let's say like a stone or a rock, or could you like any shape that you wanted? Could
Yes.
you kind of
Yeah, you can mould it around it. There's only one. There's one limitation, and I'll demonstrate it here a bit. If I go over the edges here. So push that in. Take these pins out. Okay, so the good thing about this in millinery is that now I've blocked this, it's finished. I can keep going on the next step. So if you think about this as compared to using buckram or cinema or felt or such as the foundation, then usually you have to let them dry on the block, like overnight or until they're dry. And this is not like that. Like it's ready to use now. So once I've made sure there are no soft bits on it, then I can take it off my block. So going back to what you were talking about, the limitation of this is that now it's really stuck on there, and I'm going to find it really hard to get it off my piece here. So if you think about a hat block, then you have to either have a 5-section block or a shape that's going to allow you to take the Fosshape off. Because once this is set like this, you can't change the shape. Whereas the other thermoplastics that I'm going to show you, you can heat them up and they'll change shape again. But this one doesn't, so I might have to just do a little bit of cutting to get it off the block. on this shape is not too bad because this is probably what I'm going to do with it anyway. Would be to cut around this and I'd then wire it.
So you have to stiffen this, like it's stiffened, it's done.
No, you shouldn't have to stiffen it. Well, with this one, I'll pass it around and I'll show you the difference between this one, which is the Fosshape 300, so the lightest one, and the Fosshape 600. I'm only using this 300 because that's what I had laying around in a piece. But you can see that that's sort of ready to go. You can pass it around and have a bit of a feel. Whereas this one, if you pass it around, that's been done on the same block, but that's the 600, so it's thicker.
300, 600.
Yeah.
More thick, right?
So this is a flat piece of it, and if I steam on that, hopefully you'll be able to see it shrink. So it does shrink quite a lot. But you can use it sort of use it flat, and in that case, like, it might be good for something like a huge collar or something like that. And I've seen someone embroider, like do machine embroidery on this and then stiffen it and over something. But you'd have to be happy with the surface, and that's not something that I would do, but you know, it's sort of up to you. But then you could cut shapes out of this and cover it with stuff. So that's something you might want to consider. But the Fosshape 400, which is in between the two, is the one that's black. I don't know why they've only made this one black and whatever, but that's the way it is. So you can pass that around too, but it's the same thing, only black. So now for millinery, I would again wire these, but you can see that the surface is relatively smooth, so you don't necessarily, if you're covering, well, you'd always be covering this shape with something. So it's a good foundation for blocking leather or fabric or some other material. But because it's quite smooth, you can get away with covering it without putting wadding on it. If you're going to put a silk satin over it or something, then that may not work because you'd still see these little imperfections. But if you're putting like a wool or such over it, then you probably don't need to use wadding. So, advantages, it's quite quick to get something made. Disadvantages is once that I've blocked this, I can't change the shape. If I went in and heated this now, it would just sort of collapse and be no good for anything.
One other advantage, if you wear it to the Melbourne Cup and it pours rain all day, you'll still have a hat at the end of the day.
Yeah, that is true.
Which it often does.
Yeah, so there's a little soft spot in that I was just getting at. All right. So you're still going to have to wire. Well, this one I would still wire, but I suppose that's up to what you want
Just
to do. and
say
what you
yes,
learnt.
that's exactly what you do.
But always wire everything. That's millinery.
That's the rules.
Okay, so that's that one. The other one I'm going to demo for you is called Kobrakast, and it's comes in a sheet.
So let's just go with the spelling of that one. K.
So it's Kobrakast.
Oh, you didn't have that. Did write that down first time properly.
And this is a thermoplastic, but on the inside of it, like in the plastic, is this stretchable webbing. It's kind of like, it's like blocking net. It's like that weave, and it's kind of like a stretchy stocking. So it's quite flexible, and it's very thin. So one thing we can do with it is just block it as a foundation, and I've got, again in that same shape, blocked out of Kobrakast. This is 2 layers of Kobrakast, so pass that around too. And if you sort of flex that, you'll see that it remains a bit flexible. I think it's a good foundation if you're blocking leather or something where you may want it to be a little bit more flexible still and not like really rigid. So if you sort of dinted that, then it would be able to come back, whereas this, if you dent it, then it's gone.
It's a little bit like violin. It's kind of got that
It
aspect.
is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And
very much like
it's sort of instant, and that means that you can cut the corners with cost, but it also just has a slightly, you just got to be aware you're going to have a plastic hat by the end of it.
Yeah, yeah. And there are all things to consider. Like, it's thermoplastics cut down your time in many ways, but they're not suitable for everything. And I've very rarely used thermoplastics in my millinery because I just prefer the natural fibres. There's so much more forgiving. So what I'm going to do with this one is something completely different, and we're going to make a fabric covered piece with the thermoplastic Kobrakast. So what I've got here is my block that I'm going to use, and a piece of Kobrakast that's cut out so it's big enough to stretch over the shape, just a little bit bigger than the block. And I've also cut 2 pieces of fabric that I'm going to use. These are the same, but they don't have to be the same. The only consideration with your fabric, because it will, when you heat this up, it becomes sticky. So we're going to fuse the fabric to this thermoplastic and then use it. But if I'm going to then block it onto a shape, then my fabric has to be able to be blocked on that shape. So if I choose a really tightly woven fabric like this and want to block it over this shape, then is that going to work? The answer is no, but
So you have to
because
fuse
you're
the
gonna-
fabric to the Kobrakast before you do the blocking.
no, not necessarily, but that's what I'm going to do in this example.
Okay.
I'll show you what else you can do with it, but if I wanted to block this piece of fabric on this shape, I'm not going to be able to do that without having pleats. And if pleats is what you want, that's fine, and you can do that, but you can't do this technique that I'm just going to show you without a block that's appropriate for your fabric. So if you want to block it over a shape like this, you need to use a fabric that is going to enable that, like if you used a lycra, for instance, that might work, or a really loosely woven fabric, that might. So for this example, I'm going to use this really shallow shape that fabric's going to be able to stretch over. Okay. So you need to put your fabric over the Kobrakast and make your fabric a little bit bigger than the Kobrakast, because when I heat it up, it's going to get really sticky and stick to anything pretty much, except like glass, or if you've got a Teflon mat, then you can iron it on that and it won't stick.
So would that also include baking paper?
Yes, but it's not as good as the Teflon sheet. But yeah, I think baking paper's okay. I haven't actually tried it, but it works on most of the other thermoplastics, so it'll probably be the same. Okay, so I'm just going to get my pressing cloth because this iron's pretty feral. And I've got the right side of my fabric out, so pointing up and pointing down, and the thermoplastic, the Kobrakast in between.
Does it go sticky on both sides?
It does, yeah. And so I'm just going to use the iron. Again, you can use steam, but it's not essential, the steam only just lets the heat go through a little bit.
So it's a bit like fusible interfacing. You just have to get enough heat in so it sticks.
Very much so. You could use a press if you had a big enough press to do this.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you say that when you just passed around before, that shape was the same? Plastic. What's it called? Plastic.
Oh yeah, the
Yeah,
one I
that's-
just passed around last
If
is
it
this one.
sticky on both sides, how do you do that?
On the block,
Yeah.
with I'm not putting the iron directly on it. I'll show you. It'll become apparent in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the other thing that some people have used is those heat guns that people use to strip paint off things, and it's like a hairdryer, except if you did it on your hair, it would all catch fire. Yeah.
Yeah, any source of heat will activate these. Like you can put it in a tub of hot water too. It would do essentially the same thing. You wouldn't be able to do this, but you'd be able to soften the plastic. So once you're pretty sure that that's fused together, as well as becoming sticky, when you heat the thermoplastic up, it gets soft and pretty malleable. I'm going to heat that up again with the steam and then grab my block. And actually I haven't got a stand.
Oh, hang on.
Might not need
The
one.
stands are in the next room, and the cupboards aren't locked. Do you need?
Actually, yeah, we might wait for
Yeah.
one. It's probably a little bit easier to show. So I'll just leave that flat. But essentially how I blocked that other one is just by heating up the thermoplastic and blocking it around this shape. You need to cover the block with plastic, like clean wire, or it will stick to the block, so
Yeah.
don't do that.
Big two. I don't know which one. So
Yeah, I think. So let's. I'll just heat this up again.
It's interesting to note you've got a bit of silk organza for your pressing cloth.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I love silk organza and pressing cloth
There
for
you go.
fabric,
Yeah.
not for cinema.
Cinema, use
Yes,
cinema.
That's a good Serena Lindemann trick. Okay. So, again, when you're dealing with a fabric and blocking it, you have to look at the grain, and the same with blocking your cinema. I need to start by pinning along the straight grain edges, so north, south, east, and west. You'll understand that.
Yep.
Like so, same as when you're blocking any other woven fabric, that is. Alright, so I've blocked those two bits, and now I've come to block this and it's gone stiff again. So what I need to do is heat that up. I just used my steam to heat it up then, which is enough. And then around the other side, same thing. Okay, a couple of pins in each corner. So now I can work on my bias section and just block that in. It's not going to be too difficult with this block because it's very flat. So then just working around. And so as this cools down, it gets stiff again. So I can essentially just do this and wait for it to cool down if I want, and I don't have to use too many pins, but I will put a few in there just for good measure. And this is only one piece thick, so it cools down reasonably fast.
So is it optimal to be using more than one layer?
Well, that depends on what you're doing. The one that I passed around had 2 layers, which is what I think you need to use if you're, especially if you're trying to stretch something over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like a leather or something, then you definitely need 2 layers just to hold it without the foundation buckling. But for some other shapes, and also the more you stretch it, the thinner it gets. So if you're stretching it a lot to block over your shape, to get it smooth over your shape, then it's getting thinner anyway. So you definitely need 2 for something like that.
And do you blocking both layers in the one time?
Yeah. You could do one at a time, but there's no reason to do that. If I was doing 2 layers, then I would heat them both together.
So line them up so the grain's the same, so they behave.
Yes. If you didn't get them right, lined up, it would still work because it stretches in every direction. But because this is a netting in there, it's not a woven fabric. It's designed to stretch in all directions. This is the one. Actually, this is the demo I did last year. This has only got 1 piece in it, and it's quite flexible, but it's strong enough to support itself like that. But that's kind of up to you. If you want it to be more sturdy, then you could put 2 layers. But
And would you wire the edge of that? Does it take kindly to a needle?
Always wire. Look, you could get away with not wiring it, but it's nicer with a bit of a wire in it.
Not here, they wouldn't.
It's always nicer with wire. But yes, to answer your question, you can use a sewing machine on this. You can use a hand needle. It's not too hard to go through. If you're having a bit of trouble, like if you've blocked something and you've got a little bit of a thick section, then a leather needle, like a hand sewing leather needle, is good. That goes for all the thermoplastics. I sometimes have to use it on the Fosshape 600 in like a hard spot where it might have been overlaid or layered rather. So I'll just keep going on this.
What's that fabric that you're using now, Lindsay?
This yellow fabric.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just some polyester brocade, I think. It's nothing special.
It's in my mind, it's revolutionised fabric-covered hats, because making a brim with that just cuts out so many steps, and you can just sandwich it like Lindsay's done, insert the crown the way you do with your cineme, and in fact you can fuse the tip and then do a side band, which is one of the things that we'll do this term. So you can do a tip and side band on a single. A Kobrakast can be fully blocked, like blocking net, and the fabric can be then pieced over it, and it works really nicely.
Yeah. So to make this in a traditional millinery method, it'd be almost impossible.
No, yeah, because it's so light, and it's just...
I'd have to block this inside fabric over my block and get it to hold that shape, and then somehow glue it onto the underside without the glue.
How many layers would you end up with? I think there's about 5.
So that's the reason I like it for this sort of fabric covered business, because I can get a really thin brim or whatever on my hat without the need for wadding and without all these other steps that I have to go
It's smooth as can be and light, and it just completely changes the game.
But again, it's plastic, so you have to take that into consideration. I've got in my shop, if you come in, there's a hat that I've made entirely out of Kobrakast and covered in fabric. And to put it on my head, it's not very comfortable because you've got that rigid plastic sitting there.
You might modify that by using elastic velvet in the head fit.
Yeah, like, I mean, you can work with it. It's not like you wouldn't use it, but one of you, was it Jimmy? You were using some green. You had a picture of a green hat. Yeah.
Oh, the green hat.
Yeah, the one you're going to do with the thermoplastic with the cinema brim and the.
Come on.
No.
Maybe it wasn't you.
She's so organised.
I was going to say she's got 400 hats, so I've got no chance of knowing which one it was.
I think my hibiscus one was done on that. On this
Yes.
block.
Right. And you used Kobrakast for the
So,
leather.
Yeah, that block's from here from last year, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Anyway, so what I'm getting at is that if you had a brim out of this and you blocked a bit that's going to sit on your head out of something else that's nicer, then you can still get away with a really nice brim,
Oh, this
but it's
one?
not.
This photo.
Yeah, that's the one. That's what I was thinking. Like, you could make a hat like that with 2 pieces that has a really nice thin brim out of fabric, but something more comfortable to go on your head. So it's not like I would never use it. I've made another one in that, and it's nice. You get a really beautiful brim covered in fabric that's really thin and flexible. So in millinery, you can't really ask for much better than that. Yeah. But again, I have to stress that it's the fabric that's the limitation on this. Whether the fabric is going to fit over your block or work on your block, that's what you have to make sure before you start.
And you've made it quite clear, Lindsay, that if you get something like that off the block and you're tempted to give it a little bit of steam, just don't.
Yeah.
It'll break your heart.
It'll go soft.
It'll go
again.
floppy, and
because you've cut the excess off, you can't reblock it. Well, it's not very easy to reblock it. Okay, so I've essentially done that. If I wanted to get a little bit more detail here, then I could find something to press that down in like a circle and just heat that up and get a bit more definition. But it's all right as it is, I think.
So really, it's you could actually just take to it with the scissors and cut that straight off now, as soon as it's gone cool.
Yeah, as soon as it's cool, it's ready to go. So I'll leave it just a minute because it's not quite cool, and then I'll cut it off. So the difference between this one and the Fosshape is that now if I want to get this off the block and I don't necessarily want to cut it, then I can just heat these edges up and move them back. And it's also a little bit more flexible than the Fosshape. So I haven't I've got options with this. Like Serena was just saying that you wouldn't want to steam that and do much with it, but you could do something with it. Like if you needed to, if you wanted to be a bit more fancy with it or go a bit wild, you could heat this up and twist it and deform it and change it. Or say you block to this.
Does the double layering of fabric prevent you from doing massively wild idea things, or are you constrained by the fabric?
You're constrained by your fabric more than the plastic, but say if you didn't like this shape anymore and you wanted to block it over that, then if your fabric will allow, I could heat this up and re-block it over a totally different shape. Like I'm going to be wasting a bit, but it's not set in stone is all I'm trying to say. So especially before you cut the edges off, you can do that. So if you block this up and you think, oh, that's really not doing it for me, then I can just heat that up and take it off and block another shape.
And could you take it back to square one, a nice flat sheet again?
Yes, more or
Technically,
less.
yeah.
More or less. Like once it's been blocked, it's not going to be pristine and flat, but yeah, you don't necessarily need that. All right, so that's cooled down, and if I take those pins out.
So again, if it was used in fashion, you could have applications where you could press it on the board and then cut freestanding shapes out from the body without too much.
I have a client that buys this from me that does collars, like priest's collars and detachable collars for men's shirts and stuff, and he uses this. Loves it. So you can just use it as an interfacing, I suppose. So I'm just going to cut around this kind of roughly. And you can see it's pretty easy to cut with scissors. And can take it off the block. If you cut a little bit neater than that for a start, then it would come off even easier. There we go. My shape's done. And then I could go around and trim that really well. And you're going to have to put an edging on this because you're not going to want a raw edge, but you're not going to have to get and turn it under by hand like you would have to on a fabric covered hat. So if I trim that back now, I can, like this one, I can just get my wire out and keep going. And so another use for this if I just heat up a bit that's got the plastic in it, then I can mould this basically into whatever I want. Just going to flatten this a little bit. Yeah, silk organza is a great pressing cloth because you can see what you're doing underneath it. Alright, put this one. Let's just some sort of shape out of it. And while it's warm, yeah.
So if you were using leather for that, it wouldn't, it stabilises the woven fabrics, but the leather edge is probably got some trim potential as well.
So the edge on this is quite nice. As long as you fuse the fabric to it really well, you're not going to get fraying on your edge here, unless you really work it too much. But you can do things like that and make a flower, etc. Or same thing for like collars and whatnot. If you just do it flat, but yeah, you can if you put a bit of shape into it. And once you put some shape into it, it gets really quite strong because you've got laminated shapes there. But it's quite light and thin, and that's where the real advantage is. And if you do that shape and you don't like it, then you heat it up again and change it. And so that's why I like this Kobrakast.
So does it respond to flower tools?
Yeah, no reason why you couldn't use the flower tools.
Depends on the fabric that you're fused onto it.
Yeah, exactly. It's if you're going to use a really hot tool that's going to burn your fabric, then it's probably too hot for the thermoplastic anyway. It only sort of needs to get to about say 45, 50 degrees before it'll start getting warm enough to move. They say about 70 degrees is what it needs to be, but it becomes soft before that.
And if you have it that hot, it's going to stay soft for too long.
Yeah,
it's probably better to have it on a warm up just enough, and then it's going to drop down below that temperature quickly.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's magnificent.
You could reuse it at any time, right? So if I take this, leave the scraps there, and in a month's time say, let's make a flower out of this.
Yeah, sure. It's just heated up again.
I could see a sort of collar of sculptured shapes could be really wonderful.
Absolutely, and also like we've got lots of students who like to do little flowers or like some kind of applique on their dresses.
Yeah, especially with self.
Because usually we always have like, how do you finish the edges? Do you do a baby lock? To have it neat. This is an amazing way.
Yeah, and it won't fray. Like it's really quite nice. You wouldn't be able to dry clean it, but other than that, it's great. So the Kobrakast in millinery you can use as a foundation or as a trimming aid like this. Like I'm sure Sharina's showed you the flowers with the Visifix and wire. Did you do those? Yeah. So same as that.
If we haven't, we will. But yes, using the fabric with the wire in between and the layers, 2 layers of fabric fused together.
Yeah. So it's a very similar thing. Only in this you don't need the wire because the thermoplastic's doing
the work.
The strength work. There's really no sort of limit as to how big. It's just the bigger you are, the floppier it's sort of going to be. The sheets come quite big, so this piece that I had, like you can sort of see how big, if that circle wasn't cut out, that's a quarter of a sheet. So that's the smallest piece that I sell, and then it gets up to the full size sheet's 1.5 meters by 1 metre, so you can get a big broom out of it if you're wanting to do something big. It's just probably more to do with your block.
Yeah, thank you. That's brilliant.
No worries.
I'm going to turn this gadget off now